Hello everyone, I am Aurelian, and today we have a special video which will go over the history of the Tuskegee Airmen and the aircraft they used and fought against, and fly them in War Thunder. Although depicted in multiple books, plays, movies, and shows, I feel that I can add to that narrative by focusing on their actual history and the people that made up the Red-Tailed Angels. We're going to start with an overview of how the Tuskegee Airmen were formed. Prior to World War II, there were no African American pilots allowed by the U.S. Army Air Force. Previously, only individuals like Eugene Bullard had flown in combat for the Allies during World War I, but only in French squadrons. Bullard, despite being a pilot who had flown over 20 combat missions over France, had then attempted to join the U.S. Army Air Service when the U.S. entered into World War I. Due to his race, he was rejected by the medical board. Thus began a long fight by multiple organizations like the NAACP and labor unions to allow for African American pilots. After years of trying and overcoming obstacles, in 1939 an appropriations bill was passed with a segment that designated funds for training African American pilots. The War Department used that money to fund civilian flight schools willing to train black American pilots. After a few more years, in 1941, the first all-black aviation unit was created, the 99th Pursuit Squadron. In March, the new program was aided by the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, inspecting the unit. She flew with a civilian instructor, C. Alfred Chief Anderson. Anderson was an experienced pilot and took the First Lady on a 30-minute flight in a Piper J3 Cub. After they landed, Roosevelt appeared to have had a ball and exclaimed, "Well, you can fly all right." Eleanor, ever the philanthropist, was able to funnel some funds to the civilian part of the program. The Tuskegee program and the 99th Pursuit program were first set up in Illinois, but shortly were moved to the area of Tuskegee, Alabama, earning their name. The group was made up of black Americans, but due to the War Department regulations, were led by white officers. After going several different commanders who accused the men of being lazy or unfit for service, the Tuskegee Airmen found an ally in the form of Major Noel Parrish, who fought for them to be allowed to serve in combat. After years of training and creating a backbone of experienced pilots, the 99th was sent to combat duty in North Africa in April of 1943. When they arrived, they were paired up with the 33rd Fighter Group, who initially did not give them any assistance or guidance. The first combat mission the 99th Group received was to attack a small island named Pantelleria as part of Operation Corkscrew. The purpose of this was to ensure that sea lanes were under Allied control prior to the invasion of Sicily in July of 1943. The 99th performed its first combat mission on June 2, 1943, and the aerial attack resulted in the surrender of the Italo-German garrison. On the 2nd of July, Lieutenant Charles Hall was the first black American having recorded a kill. Throughout 1943 and early 1944, the 99th fought tooth and nail across North Africa and later Sicily, including on the 27th and 28th of July, where the unit was credited for defending Allied troops from attacking Focke-Wulf 190s during their landing procedures, where they shot down 13 of the total 32 German aircraft downed. By February of 1944, a second fighter group had arrived, the 332nd, after having been in training since 1942. The 332nd and the 99th were then primarily designated as bomber escorts and ground attack aircraft. Throughout the war, the U.S. engaged in a costly strategic bombing campaign and used fighters to attempt to escort the bombers as far as they could. Although initially they faced severe blowback from the units that they worked with, eventually they became recognized for caring for the bomber crews themselves instead of chasing the glory of getting air-to-air kills. German tactics often involved distracting the fighter escorts by baiting them away from the bomber formation, allowing the rest of the German fighters to prey upon the bombers, who were generally helpless in their formations. This tactic appeared to not work on the Tuskegee Airmen, who painted their tails red for unit identification. They earned the nickname Red-Tailed Angels for their work in saving crews and protecting bombers. In early 1945, the unit earned a Distinguished Unit Citation for one mission in which they escorted B-17s on a raid on the Daimler-Benz tank factory in Berlin. During this mission, the bomber formation was attacked by Me-262 jet fighters. The 332nd were credited with killing 3 262s, losing only 2 bombers out of the total formation of 250. The Germans called the 302nd and the 99th the Schwarze Vogelmenschen, or Black Birdmen. Initially, the Tuskegee Airmen flew the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, as seen here, as well as briefly the P-39 Air Cobras. Both of these planes were considered obsolete at this point in the war, considering this is late 1943 and 1944. Other units already had P-47s and P-51s. They flew these obsolete aircraft from their activation up until June of 1944, when the 99th began to receive P-47 Thunderbolts and the 332nd began to receive P-51 Mustangs in July of 1944. These planes were by and large considered much better fighter aircraft than the P-40s and the P-39s, and they had longer ranges, allowing for extended escort missions. The P-51 Mustangs, specifically the C variant here, which unfortunately I don't have unlocked, are what the Red Tails are most iconically remembered in. From 1941 to 1946, 355 pilots were deployed in combat theaters. Among them, 84 pilots lost their lives. The Tuskegee Airmen flew 1,578 combat missions. They flew 179 bomber escort missions, losing bombers on only 7 of those 179 missions, with a total of only 27 bombers downed, compared to the average of 46 downed lost by other fighter squadrons in that period of time. The Tuskegee Airmen scored 112 kills in the air and 150 kills on the ground of enemy planes, with a plethora of other ground units such as tanks, trucks, trains, and boats being destroyed. They earned 3 Distinguished Unit Citations, 1 Silver Star, 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 14 Bronze Stars, 744 Air Medals, and at least 60 Purple Hearts. Now, we'll take a look at the vehicles and the planes that they flew briefly, as we'll do detailed breakdowns on these in our Historical View series. The P-40 Warhawk here is equipped with 6 50 cal machine guns and is generally considered a jack-of-all-trades fighter. It was used early on by U.S. forces in both China and North Africa. The P-39 Air Cobra was used in much smaller numbers and is equipped with a 37mm cannon right there in the nose with a high rate of speed. It also had 2 50 cals right here in the nose and then 4 7.62 machine guns in the wings. Of course, the P-40 and P-39s had multiple variants, as did the P-47s and P-51s. The P-47s generally had 8 50 cal machine guns and extremely powerful engines. However, they had an extended turning time and were better at the high altitude straight line fighting. Meanwhile, the P-51s generally had either 6 50 cal machine guns, or later on some cannons were outfitted. However, most had 50 cals. These had also very powerful engines and most importantly a long-range escort capability. Now since these planes are spread out across multiple BRs, we're going to be taking a look at them in the test mode just to kind of show you how these things fly in game and to more just reflect on the history of them. We're going to go with realistic battles. We're going to spawn on the glide path. Target training ranks low, everything else being pretty much standard here. We'll start with the P-40, then use the P-39, P-40, Thunderbolt, and the P-51. This aircraft has to be one of my favorites to look at. I love the aggressive pointed nose, and when it comes to mind of a fighter, this is what I think of. It's probably my second favorite behind the F-4U Corsairs. Let's fly over here and try to engage these I-153s, and then go and strafe some ground units just like the 99th and 332nd would have done. Unfortunately, I did look on the War Thunder skins page, and I found some skins, but a lot of them were very outdated. I'll also probably show some B-roll of the Red Tails movie, which was a pretty good movie in my opinion, despite its issues. Now, obviously these guys can't fight back, but as you can see, it has a decent turning time and a decent engine, with those 50 cals really causing some issues. At the BR that the P-40s are at, they are not always facing other 50 cals. There's some 7.62, 7.7, 7.92. So the 50 cals pack a punch. Just remember, generally speaking, you're going to be less maneuverable and potentially have less engine than an enemy aircraft. Water getting a little bit hot there, so I'm going to cool it down a bit as much as I can before we go in for the strafing runs. I do like this cockpit as well. It's very detailed. One can imagine flying over Italy and North Africa in one of these bad boys. Probably being outclassed, but your goal was to protect the ground troops and shoot down the enemies. The 50 cals, when you're doing these kind of ground fire, are very helpful. If you choose to take the P-40 into a ground battle, they do have the capability of taking some underslung bombs and such. However, the 50 cals themselves will not be sufficient, as you can see, versus some armored targets. But open-topped and trucks and things of that nature, like AA trucks, you'll have no issues. Alright, now let's move on to the next one. We're going to go to the P-36 Air Cobra in the same conditions. Do a test flight here, all the same. I did kind of skip around in the tree some, and I grounded out the US tree long before anything else. So one thing that you will notice is obviously the P-39 is a higher BR than the P-40, but it's got a very good engine in my opinion, but is a little unmaneuverable, simply because it's a hefty aircraft. But good engine, good boom and zoom in my opinion. I'm sure others have some differing ones. The nose cannon, of course, is very interesting. It's a 37 mil, and we'll see when we slot in behind this I-153 the fire rate that we got going on. I have not played the P-39 very much. I used to have it way back in the day. The engine does get a little hot when you're doing war emergency power, but that is most engines. Decent turn time. Really the standout on this is going to be the guns. Boom, just like that. Now we will try a ground strafe here of these moving light tanks with the 37 mil and see if we can get some hits. So with the 37 mil, you can definitely do some damage, but I feel like you would need multiple passes for it to work. Again, just like the P40, you do have the opportunity to use some, whatchamacallit, underslung bombs and what have you. And they will certainly work for you, as the United States did have kind of a policy of every fighter is, well, not every fighter, but most fighters are also bombers. Let's move on here. We're going to go to the P-47 Thunderbolt. We'll use this one here at 4.0. Same deal. Again, the P-47s were also considered fighter bombers, so you can take some bombs if you so choose. The advantage that the P-47 has is not its turn time, but it is fast, especially at high altitude, and it has those 8 50 cals in the wings. Just don't get into a turn fight with it and you'll be fine. This is probably one of the ultimate boom and zoom fighters in the game. It's a very stable aircraft, and it's nicknamed the Juggernaut as well because it has some basic armoring and is generally considered a tough aircraft by its pilots. Now, the Red Tails would have used this plane mainly for their bomber escort missions at this point in the war. However, they still did do quite a bit of strafing. Let's see here. Let's see if we can get some shots. Got some hits. As you can see, this thing's abysmal turning time. But we will certainly get some good hits. There we go. Now, once again, with these tanks here, the 50 cals are not going to be sufficient. So we're going to go strafe some ground units. I think that these 50 cals have a decent rate of fire compared to some others, which I also think is advantageous. However, due to the prevalence of cannons, once you start getting a little bit higher in the BR, I certainly would try not to go head-on with other aircraft. As good as 50 cals are, a cannon is going to be better. So we will strafe these trucks here, coming in. And boom. Alright, last but not least, we're going to go to the P-51C, which, again, that's the iconic one. In-game, there is some skins for it, and this version of this skin here does have a red tail. It also has some 99th Pursuit Squadron liveries available. So the P-51C, I believe, only has 4 50 cals. Compared to the later 6 or other armament combos. This is kind of one of the more early P-51s, which the 332nd and 99th would have received, considering the War Department did not want to give them more advanced aircraft for whatever reason. Certainly, probably something to do with some racism. Now, eventually, I think that the Army Air Corps realized that they were a good unit and kind of was able to update their aircraft and give them a little bit more leeway. So the P-51s, good engines, all around a good fighter, a much better turn time than say the P-47. This is when somebody thinks of a American World War II fighter, they're gonna think of a P-51 Mustang. Catch up here to this I-153. Do some long-range shots there. Now again, the advantage of this aircraft, and part of the reason why they didn't really receive cannons, except in some experimental prototypes, which we'll go over in the video about the P-51 series, is that they had an extremely long range and were able to be fitted with drop tanks, which would make it much easier for them to escort those B-17s, B-24s, and later B-29s over Europe and specifically Germany. The P-51s were well liked by their crews, as well as well liked by the 332nd and 99th. We'll finish off by strafing these trucks here because again, the 50 cals very good versus open-topped, and trucks like this not so good against tanks and things with more than a few millimeters of armor. Do another pass there because I messed up the shots. Wouldn't be an Aurelian video without me missing. There we go. Target down. Well, this has been a special on the Tuskegee Airmen, focusing more on their history than the War Thunder aspect. But I just think that it is incredible that we have a game where you can fly these planes that they flew relatively realistically. I'm going to do one more shot here on this I-153. Use the engine power of this P-51 to catch up, and then we'll end the video there. I hope that you guys were able to learn something. I plan on doing a few of these specials here and there where I look at a particular unit of renown, or fighter squadron, or tank squadron, and kind of go over the different vehicles that they used over time and focus on their history versus the vehicle's history. I hope that you guys enjoy that kind of content, and although most of the time I'll try and get into some battles with them, I think that this one's more appropriate just because of the massive gap that was present between the vehicles in terms of their BR. It would be easier for me to do this than do 4 different realistic battles, especially with some that I don't even have unlocked yet. But I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and see you next time.